I'm going to start off class with a little warm-up. So there are so many benefits to gardening, whether it's the therapeutic effects to simply the bounty of produce it gives us. One of the magical elements of gardening is that it's often entwined with nostalgia, those sweet memories. And for our warm-up, I want you all to close your eyes and think of any fond memory you have attached to gardening or summertime foods in general. Go through your senses. Maybe it's the flavor of a sweet strawberry, the smell of a smoky barbecue in the distance. Maybe it's the feeling of dirt on hands. Is there a certain food that comes to mind, a location, a feeling? And when you're ready, I would love for you to share these memories. And I created a slide here of pictures of gardens I've worked with. And these pictures always bring a smile to my face. When I do this reflection activity, the first thing that comes to mind is picking sour cherries with my pawpaw. And I have a little picture here of a few buckets of cherries that we would pick every summer. Every time I taste these cherries, I think of him.
Well, so it looks like the fresh tomatoes with basil, warm, fresh picked summer tomatoes and berries, eating a ripe tomato and smelling the plant. That's one of my favorites. Ooh, fresh corn on the cob.
Mm. These are all great. Yeah, there's something very, I think because summertime produce, we often think of tomatoes, and tomatoes, not only do they have a very distinct smell, but the plant has a distinct feeling to it too. You could always smell it on your hands after picking.
Eating peas off the plant in the garden.
Oh, yeah, the smell of fresh herbs has therapeutic effects to that too. I know there's a lot of studies with aromatherapy and mental health, and it just goes to show that gardens are very powerful and transformative for many different reasons. It's such a blessing to have a bountiful garden yield during the summer, but when you have so many veggies, so many that you don't know what to do with all of them, it can start to feel like a curse. A beautiful part of gardening for me is that it encourages sharing food, knowledge, stories with your neighbors, friends, families, coworkers. It helps build community. That being said, learning produce preservation methods is a great way to enjoy your garden produce year-round. And there are many methods of preservation. We're talking just about freezing today, but you can also can, pickle, dehydrate, make jams and jellies. And I want to give a shout out to the Phipps Culinary Arts page on our website. There are a ton of cooking classes that are being offered this summer, all about these preservation methods. There's a class on preserving tomatoes, a ton on pickling and fermenting, a quick jam making class, and more. We're also offering family cooking classes as well, and I will be sure to share these in a follow-up email. Before we get to the steps of freezing garden produce and making freezer meals, I thought I would test your knowledge. So we are going to play the Does It Freeze Well game. And the first items we have are cucumbers and lettuce. Do these freeze well? And I just launched the poll question, so feel free to answer that way. You can also answer in the chat. I know sometimes it's hard to use the poll function when using your cell phone. So let's see. The majority of us are answering no. And the majority is correct. No, cucumbers and lettuce do not freeze well. They become waterlogged and soggy when frozen. But you know what? We have an excellent, tasty way of preserving cucumbers, and that is pickling. And thank goodness we have pickling, because if you have a cucumber plant, you know it is a gift that keeps giving. The next one, does it freeze well? We have potatoes. We have russet potatoes and we have sweet potatoes. Do these freeze well raw? It looks like, ooh, we are split. We are split between the answers. Some of you think just the sweet potatoes freeze well. Some of you think they both freeze well. Some of you think none of them freeze well. And the answer is raw potatoes do not freeze well. Most potatoes do not work in the freezer, especially if they are raw. And this is because they become soggy and grainy and they become browned, which is just very unappetizing. There are some exceptions. Mashed potatoes can freeze well if they're incorporated with a fat like butter, or heavy cream or olive oil. And you can blanch potatoes. This helps with the texture, but raw potatoes are a big no. The third one, does it freeze well? We have summer squash. And it looks like most of us say yes, it freezes well. And you're right, I thought I would trick you with this one. But summer squash freezes well, even though it has a high water content. And you can freeze zucchini using the blanching method that I'll get into in a bit, or you can do it by just shredding the zucchini. It is soggy once defrosted, but it still works really well in quiches and casseroles and in breads. And zucchini bread is a summertime delight, so why not shred that zucchini so you can enjoy it year round? And the last one we have is, does it freeze well? We have apples and peaches. Looks like most of us say yes. And you would be correct. There is a but though. They require a little more TLC. Apples and peaches brown quickly when air hits the inside of the fruit, but you could prevent this by soaking them in a lemon mixture or by treating them with ascorbic acid. And for the lemon mixture, it's recommended of using 4 cups water with 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. This is the perfect ratio where it doesn't make the fruit too sour, too citrusy, but it still helps with the browning. But if you like the sour citrusy taste, you can always add more. So what about the other fruit? Well, thankfully, freezing fruit is a very simple process. Most fruits retain a lot of their fresh flavors and nutrients. As you know, the texture is a lot softer when defrosted, but this actually works great for smoothies and baked goods. So the first step to freezing fruits is to wash and prep them. You'll want to de-pit, peel, and slice your fruits if necessary. I've made the horrible mistake of freezing bananas with the peels on. It is a mess. You do not want to do that. And as I mentioned before, peaches, apples, pears, apricots should be treated with an acid to reduce browning. Now, there are different methods for preserving fruits. You can freeze them in a syrup solution, pack them with sugar, or just do the dry pack method, which is no syrup, no sugar, just freezing them without any additives. And of course, I encourage the dry pack method. The texture quality goes down a little, but fruit is already naturally so sweet, so adding sugar really isn't necessary. And to prevent your fruit from freezing in one big chunk, you'll want to place your chopped fruit on a cookie sheet and put it in the freezer first. Once everything is frozen, you can take it out and put it all together in a bag. And I included a picture of that here. And I also included a picture of an easy way to seal your bags without having a vacuum sealer, and that is the straw method. So the straw method, really easy. You basically just put a straw in the bag, seal the bag, and then suck out all of the air. And this will create a great seal and prevent freezer burn. Metal straws work best for this, which is great because that is also the more sustainable option. And unlike fruit, most vegetables need to be blanched before cooking, with the exception of sweet and hot peppers, ginger, onions, turmeric root, and raw tomatoes. They don't need to be blanched. I know blanching might seem intimidating, but I'm hoping to provide some reassurance that it's pretty simple. If you can grow a garden, you can grow a bountiful garden from a little seed, you can certainly blanch a vegetable. There are 3 methods for blanching. There's the boiling method, the steaming method, and the microwave method. I've always done the boiling method, so that's the one I'm going to talk about today. What you'll want to do is set a large pot of salted water to a boil, and once it starts boiling, immerse the vegetable in the boiling water and make sure your veggies are chopped first. You don't want to add just the whole head of broccoli into the water. And once the water returns to a boil, then begin the timing process for the vegetable you are blanching. Now, this is where it gets a little complicated, and this is why some people might feel a little intimidated blanching, but I included a link on the slide of a blanching chart. Every vegetable has a unique blanching time, and this resource spells it out very clearly for us. So if you have that, you'll have all the times you need. So the length of blanching is typically just a few minutes. And once that time is up, you want to quickly remove the food from the boiling water and plunge them into an ice water bath. And as soon as they are cool, you'll want to drain the produce, and then they are ready for the freezer. And with veggies, you can do the same cookie sheet method to avoid them all clumping together. And there you have it. And when it comes to making freezer meals, there are a few other foods that hold up well and a few others that really don't do well in the freezer. Produce-wise, cabbage, celery, endive, radishes, lettuce, and potatoes, like I mentioned earlier, they all don't freeze well. They either become really mushy, they become grainy, waterlogged, the opposite of tasty and appetizing. Cooked pasta, especially spaghetti, amaranth, and teff, also has a mushy texture and loses shape when defrosted. Most proteins, thankfully, freeze really well, with the exception of cooked egg whites. They become super rubbery. And dairy can be difficult to freeze. Milk, cream sauces, and sour cream all separate and curdle when frozen. And soft cheeses their texture is just destroyed because they have a high water content. And we love soft cheeses because of their delightful texture. So they just are not meant for the freezer. Foods that do freeze well. Thankfully, a ton of produce freezes really well. And you can use the frozen vegetable and fruit aisle in the grocery store as a reference guide for what you can freeze. And I know some of you might mention, hey, but you can find frozen potatoes in the freezer aisle. You just said potatoes don't freeze well. This is because they're probably blanched, so they're okay, but the potatoes that you find in the freezer aisle are never fully raw. And for grains, whole grains are wonderful for the freezer. Barley, buckwheat, millet, quinoa, rye, bulgur wheat, farro, breads, the list goes on. Rice is sometimes iffy. I wouldn't recommend using rice in a soup and freezing that because it becomes really soggy. The same is for pasta, but solo rice is usually fine if you freeze it outside of a liquid. You can always sprinkle a little water on the rice when reheating to prevent it from drying out. And actually barley is great in frozen soups, so that is a replacement you could use if you find a soup that you want to freeze but it uses rice. Proteins, like I mentioned, a lot of proteins do great in the freezer. Scrambled eggs, meat, tofu, surprisingly, tempeh, beans, they're all good. Hard cheeses are much better than soft cheeses in the freezer, and nuts are also great to freeze. I like to buy nuts in bulk just to save money, and sometimes I worry about them going bad, so I always freeze a little bit. And I also wanted to mention that soups and stews, curries, chilies, and stir fries are all excellent freezer meal options. With freezer meals, you want to make foods that you actually like and view it as a future gift for yourself. What's better than a cozy meal to warm your soul up after a really long day? And I am going to end my talk with a few food safety tips. I know not the most exciting, but it's important. The last thing I want to happen is for you to get sick from trying to be healthy and doing something nice for yourself. So when it comes to storage containers, gallon-sized freezer-safe bags, mason jars, glass meal prep containers, reusable silicone bags, muffin tins are all freezer friendly. Muffin tins are really fun to use. They make the perfect single serving oatmeal cups and quiches, or you could put grains in muffin tins. That's a great way if you want to work on portion sizing to measure and freeze. And if using mason jars, you want to leave a little room at the top because food does expand when freezing. And always label your freezer meals. You are not going to want to eat something from the freezer when you don't know what it is or you don't know when it was made. There are enough things to remember in life. Just use a label, make it easy for yourself. And with leftovers, you want to freeze these within 3 to 4 days. If you wait longer, you're just freezing bad leftovers, which is not food safe or appetizing. And when making big batches of food, you want it to cool properly. Don't stick a steaming pot of chili right into the refrigerator. This will change the temperature inside your refrigerator and make it too warm, which will spoil all of your other food. The general rule of thumb is that food must cool from 135 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees in 2 hours, and food must finish cooling to 41 degrees within a total of 6 hours. And you can cool your food properly by using the shallow pan method, which is just pouring the large pot of food that you made into multiple smaller dishes. You can use size reduction. This works if you're like cooking a roast, just cutting it into smaller sizes. And ice bath are all safe ways to cool food. And improperly thawing your food is another way you can get really sick. Honestly, I improperly thawed my food until my food safety class in college, and I would just put it on the counter. Don't do this. You can thaw in the refrigerator, you can thaw in the microwave if you're in a time crunch, you can thaw in cool water bath. Depending on the food, you can just start cooking it too. This works if you have a giant pot of soup, because you are heating that to a high temperature. So you can just go straight from freezer to cooking. It just will take a little longer. So that is all I have to share. I'm going to kick it to Cassie now, and she's going to show us how to make a garden freezer meal that is tasty and utilizes what's in season right now. We are going to be making an eggplant and tomato stew.
Happy Tuesday. I had to think what day it was. So our recipe today is going to be a garden fresh eggplant and tomato stew. So the obvious first ingredient is eggplant. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how that preparation looks like, because it takes a little bit longer. So I won't have time to cook the eggplant or bake the eggplant during the demo. So I've already done it. So you need one large eggplant. You're going to peel the eggplant first and dice it into cubes. And then you'll need a baking sheet that you can grease with cooking spray or olive oil. You'll toss the eggplant in about a tablespoon of olive oil, put it on the baking sheet at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, and let it cook or let it bake for 15 minutes. And then at 15 minutes, you're going to flip to the other side so that it's cooked evenly, so that when it comes out of the oven, it looks like this. So if you could have seen what this looked like, it looked like I had a lot more eggplant, but eggplant has a lot of water in it, and so some of the water cooked out. So this is what it looks like when it's roasted. So I've set this to the side, but when you start this recipe, you can get this going in the oven so that you can work on preparing the other ingredients. The total prep time for this is about 30 minutes or about 10 minutes, but it just takes some cooking time. So I'm going to set this to the side, and we'll pretend that's in the oven. And then we're going to prepare the rest of our ingredients for our stew. So the other main ingredient is tomatoes. So you'll need 4 cups of Roma tomatoes. Roma tomatoes have this shape. I've already diced them up, but I'm going to show you how to dice a tomato. So I just kind of cut off the end there, and then I half it, and then just cut each slice in half, and then flip it and just kind of cube it. Both eggplant and tomatoes we know we can get from the garden. Farmers markets are a great time in the summer to get these ingredients. All right, so we have 4 cups of Roma tomatoes. So we're going to set these to the side. You need 1 large onion or 2 smaller onions. I have those going on the stove right now. So you're just going to peel the onions and dice the onions. put a little bit of olive oil, maybe 1 tablespoon into a large rimmed pot. And we're going to saute the onions until they become brown color, so they're caramelized. So this has also been going. So we have our onions ready to go. And it's over medium heat. So once your onion is in there, your 1 large onion, you're going to, let's see here, we're gonna add the spices. So for spices, we need garlic, 3 cloves of garlic. If you have fresh garlic, three cloves. And I've already kind of chopped that up. So we have our 3 cloves of garlic. We have 1 tablespoon of cumin here. And we have 1 tablespoon of paprika. So I'm just going to kind of combine all of our spices and herbs here into one. These go in the onions and cook for 1 minute. So I'm just going to add that in there. Stir it up a bit. And we're going to let that cook for about 1 minute. Okay. I forgot to mention with the eggplant, you can toss in salt and pepper before you roast it, if you'd like. All right, so we've got our spices in there. They're cooking for 1 minute. The next thing we're going to add are our tomatoes, and we need a 1/2 cup of vegetable broth. So measure out 1/2 cup here. Cup of vegetable broth. Let's say that our spices have been in here for about 1 minute. There goes the vegetable broth. And then we're going to put our tomatoes in. Now, once this is in here, you can let this cook for about 5 minutes. Make sure all the spices are mixed in pretty evenly. That's in there for 5 minutes. We have a few more ingredients to wrap up here. Again, all of these recipes that we do each week are really quick and easy. So once you have the ingredients, you do the prep, really the most time is involved in the baking process or the cooking process. So we'll also need a 15.5 ounce can of chickpeas. So drain those and get those ready to go in. And we need 1 tablespoon of maple syrup and a tablespoon of sriracha sauce, which I've already measured out. So once our mixture has been in for about 5 minutes, we're going to add the chickpeas, the syrup, and the sriracha sauce. So here are my chickpeas. Already drained them out of the can. They go in. Speeding this process up a little bit. It's been not quite 5 minutes, but just for timing here. So our chickpeas go in. So chickpeas, as I'm sure many of you know, are a plant-based protein. So this recipe is meatless, has lots of vegetables, but the chickpeas are a plant source of protein. So that gives us not only something from plants, but also a protein as well. So we put our chickpeas in. We've got 1 tablespoon of the maple syrup. And then a tablespoon of sriracha sauce. I'm going to use my spoon here to put that in as well. All right, and those are all the ingredients for this recipe. Now don't forget our eggplant. So this is cooking in here, our big pot. I'm going to show you what it looks like. Everything in there. There's our tomatoes, chickpeas, all of our spices in there. Now, at this point, our eggplant would still be in the oven. So ideally, we would finish this up the same time as our eggplant is done. So when the eggplant comes out of the oven, like I said, it's looking like this, and that's the last step. So simply add the eggplant to the stew. And you're gonna cook for an additional 10 minutes. So again, I'm kind of speeding this up for time reasons, but so 5 minutes before the eggplant, and then an additional 10 minutes once the eggplant is in there. And I will show you what a bowl looks like. You can also add lemon or cilantro as a topping to this if you'd like. So this is what we have as the final product. So we've got our chickpeas, our eggplant, our tomatoes, and all of our spices, onions. It smells really good. Again, I wish you guys could smell through the phone, but you can't, but it is very good. I did make it, I did taste it. It is good. One serving is about 290 calories, 8 grams of protein. Or I'm sorry, yes, 8 grams of protein, 12 grams of fat, and about 45 grams of carbohydrates. It makes 4 servings. So I think we covered just about everything. As Maris said, this is meant to be frozen. Of course, you can enjoy it fresh, but if you do choose to freeze it, make sure you cool it before you put it into any of the containers that Maris had mentioned. Glass containers, make sure you cool it. If you want to put it like in a mason jar, fill it like 3/4 of the way. Let it freeze first, a jar, and then once it's frozen, you can tighten the lid and freeze it up to 3 months. So that is it, guys. That's all I have for you today. Any questions?